Oh man, there's a lot of content today. It's Thursday. What's going on? What does this guy have to say? 12 minutes. Sean Fu as China shuts down major U.S. imports. Costco demands Chinese suppliers eat the tariffs.
Alright guys, welcome back to the USS Armageddon, and there's no turning back on this tariff war. Many countries including America's neighbors are affected. Mexico is reeling, while Canada is trying to fight back. But a big bombshell is coming on April the 2nd. Trump will unleash both reciprocal and sectorial tariffs in less than 2 weeks. Now I want us to work on the assumption that Trump is serious, that he won't roll back anything. This is his final term and there's really nothing left to lose. It's all about legacy now. Trump is going to target key sectors in the global economy.
Dude, Trump wants to go for a third term, man.
Cars, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals will be punished with a 25% tariff. But food imports, lumber, and copper exports will also be targeted, and chances are it would also be a 25% tariff as well. Now, why is Trump targeting these specific sectors? It's not just to farm revenue from the American.
I mean, just to be clear, I'm not completely against tariffs. I'm actually in support of some radical, drastic changes. Something drastic and radical needs to be done in the U.S. I'm just not sure that, I'm just not sure that these are the right people who know what they're doing in order to fix the system. Don't really have a track record of fixing the system.
American people. It's important we understand the administration's plan. The main purpose of the tariff is to reshore production of critical industries without regard to how much Americans have to pay for their goods. Now, Besson just told us the truth, that the American dream is not about access to cheap goods, it's about defending industries and creating jobs. So he's willing to trade people's standard of living for this grand reshoring experiment. Even if the US enters a recession, Trump probably won't stop. It's pedal to the metal until either US industries come back or the entire economy hits a brick wall. Take copper production for example. The US has the 5th largest reserves in the world. However,
The U.S. is the 5th largest in the world copper production in 2023. Yeah, Chile is huge. I didn't know about Peru. Okay.
they only produce 1.1 million tons a year. Their production is below China, Peru, the Congo, and Chile. This is a supply chain deficiency that Trump wants to solve. He wants a mining revival to boost domestic production. The US imports nearly half of their refined copper from overseas suppliers.
See, again, these are valid points, right? So I don't have an issue with these points. I think there needs to be drastic restructuring in the U.S. There needs to be a real, introspective moment. A lot of honest looking in the mirror and asking hard questions of how did we allow this to happen? How did we get to this point? Who was responsible? Who is responsible now? Who is allowing it to still happen? Right? These are valid questions. I'm not sure that this is the team that can do it.
That's around 1 million metric tons annually. The only way to revive the mining sector is to make foreign imports so expensive that domestic producers can finally compete. Now, how is that possible, and is it even sustainable?
Your new home deserves Xfinity.
Advertisements.
Here's the crazy answer. It's possible if US consumers permanently lower their standard of living and subsidize these companies by paying more for their goods. And once we understand this, it's simple to see how China is beginning to retaliate back against the US economy. Throwing counter tariffs on all US imports will
Americans lowering their standard of living. Yeah, it sounds absurd in the face of it, but it is kind of happening whether Americans want to or not, whether they accept it or not, whether they like it or not. There is a lot of denial and delusion in the US, so it's kind of, to be honest, a question of whether they even know it or not. They're lowering their standard of living.
Will only raise inflation for their own people. Beijing doesn't want to do it because it will hurt their standing when trying to expand trade globally. So the countermove has to be surgical and must not hurt China's economy. So they have officially halted all US LNG imports. It's like a cancellation of all future plans. China hasn't imported anything from the US for 40 days, the longest gap in almost 2 years. This is the result of just a 15% tariff on American LNG imports. There are simply no shipments to China anymore, and that's how effective China's tariffs are because their supply chains are extremely well fleshed out. They can find alternatives in the global market. That's the difference between Trump's strategy and Beijing. China still wants to lower prices for their manufacturing to boost domestic consumption. The US, however, wants to reshore industry by getting their citizens to subsidize domestic producers. Trump wants to bring home production at any cost, and he tells us that the US is trying to build a self-sufficient economy because if prices are that high, they can forget about competing in the global export market. Since 2021, the US has been selling 400,000 tons of LNG a month to China, but now this will probably drop to zero for the indefinite future.
Well, I mean, to be honest, there was a boneheaded strategy by the US where the assumption was that China would get enriched by providing cheap labor and making cheap goods. And there was a lot of trust made in exchange for what can honestly only be called kickbacks to people with really nice titles. This assumption that China would never innovate. So, it's like, oh, okay, America would be the innovation hub of the world and China would just manufacture it. And I mean, it was a rather large leap of faith without any guarantees of any sort. And to be honest, in honesty, the only way to justify or understand what happened was that it was a rationalization for corruption. No one in their right minds, if you get to that level, you have to have some sort of brain cells in your head, and no one at that level could seriously have assumed that like China would just forever give up its right to innovate.
Beijing is now looking to buy the supply from Asia Pacific or the Middle East. Now this isn't because prices are cheaper there, they might even be more expensive, but it doesn't matter now. It's because China is trying to drive revenue down for US LNG exporters. Beijing is the largest importer of LNG, buying over 80 million tons a year. And when you cut away demand, you threaten to increase supply and drive profits down for US suppliers. And if this continues for long enough, new projects could get delayed or even halted. But that's just the top of the iceberg. As the US moves inwards, Beijing is moving outwards. China is using their huge consumer demand for energy as a bargaining chip and lifeline to build stronger economic relations with countries within their sphere of influence. To secure more LNG supply, they signed a 15-year contract with Australia's Woodside Energy, and that will bring them 600,000 tons of fuel annually for 15 years. Now, is China paying more? Perhaps, but
Yeah, but I mean, it's tricky considering that Australia is a part of the Five Eyes group. It's a strong ally of the US. So, China is trying to make it harder, financially harder. So they're trying to essentially, it's a nice little candy given to Australians. Like, here's a nice source of revenue. We can be as good for you financially as the US. We can throw more stuff your way. So, take this contract away. It's a very it's a very strategic move, a very good strategic move, because they took away the contract from the US and they offered it not to, a well-established Chinese ally, but instead they offered it to an American ally. You see why it's strategically relevant is you're trying to make that American ally question its status in its relationship with the US. So
Considered diplomatic benefits. By diversifying their supply chains with Australia, it ties both economies together even closer. So, if one day the US tries to order Australia to punish China with trade tariffs,
yep.
it would be that much harder to pull the trigger. Trump's tariffs are forcing China and the world to band together to bond closer with each other. Now, this is really weird because Trump should know better. He just admitted that he's a student of history.
Dude, what are you talking about? Trump's all Trump knows how to do. The only thing we can guaranteed fact-based say about Trump is that he knows how to grift.
So as a student of history, which I am, and I've watched it all, the first thing you learn is you don't want Russia and China to get together. With that being
you don't want Russia and China to get together. Like, they're already together. What?
said, no, it's not a big part of it, but maybe that'll happen or maybe it won't. Obama really forced them together through energy and bad energy policies. And what he did, so many different things. He forced a marriage which would never have taken place.
He forced a marriage that would never have taken place. What are you talking about? Russia and China have had a relationship that goes far further back than Obama. Oh my God, I'm waiting for the day in which this guy, in which the orangutan accuses Obama of being responsible for slavery. Slavery was all Obama's fault. It was because of Obama's policies. I mean, this is the scale of how, and people believe it.
It's not a natural.
So, as China continues to cut trade with Trump's economy, it seems the opposite is happening with the US. Now, we know he has imposed an additional 20% tariff on Chinese goods, but here's the problem. The majority of consumer goods the US imports are from China. Up to 80% of Walmart merchandise comes from Chinese suppliers.
Yep.
From plastics to computers to smartphones, all of this comes from a factory somewhere in China. And once you realize this, you understand why spending in the US is under tremendous pressure. This goes beyond EVs or Chinese solar panels. When the cost of your everyday stuff goes up, there will be backlash, there will be cutbacks happening, which means US retailers from small chains to the big.
Which again, I mean, if we are to believe that the US is an innovative country that's capable of drastic change, let's assume it's possible. In order for the US to counter this, again, this is putting pressure on the US to find cheap manufacturing solutions that take China out of the loop. This provides great incentive and significant political support to invest in next generation robotics, super cheap robots that can build other robots, build out super cheap lights out factories in the US that can churn out stuff that's like even significantly cheaper than Walmart. So if the US is capable of doing that, right, and is capable of making factories that can churn out products super quick, then that counters China's speed as well. So again, it needs to happen, but I don't see it happening. I don't see Trump doing any of that. I don't see Elon talking about any of that. Instead, they're going and looking for corruption in grandma's and grandpa's mattresses. It's insane.
Big box brands could suffer a significant fall in their revenues. Profit margins will also get hammered. Besides Walmart, Costco is another US chain getting squeezed. They posted earnings of $4.02 per share in the December to February quarter, missing the estimates. As a result, their share price dropped by 7% after the earnings report. Now that Trump has raised tariffs on Chinese goods to 20%, Costco is in panic mode. Their margins are now under pressure. So should they brace for impact and accept lower sales? Should they pass the cost on to the consumer? Well, it looks like they are trying an alternative playbook. They are following the Walmart playbook of asking their Chinese suppliers to eat the tariffs. Now, Costco is pressurizing suppliers in mainland China to cut their prices, to basically absorb Trump's tariffs and spare US consumers and their bottom line. Now, this isn't good for Chinese suppliers. Their margins are already razor thin. That's why Chinese goods are so cheap around the world. Asking them to eat a 20% tariff or even just half of it will be quite impossible. It's a clear sign that retailers are getting desperate, and
It is interesting to see what will happen. It's not clear to see how this is going to play out. So, would the Chinese suppliers, do they have enough confidence to say, screw this? It makes more sense for us to redirect these resources to other BRICS nations in Africa, South America, and just like, screw it, good luck. I don't know.
even bigger signal that US consumers are simply tapped out. Walmart, Costco, they're all making a big gamble. The same one that Scott Bessent, the US Treasury head, has said on national TV.
I know you've all had the conversation up here about your purpose.
Man. Oh, Lord.
Because I believe, especially with the China tariffs, that Chinese manufacturers, they will eat the price, or eat the tariffs. I believe that the currency adjusts, and I believe if we look during President Trump's first term, that all the other things we do, if we're deregulating, if we're getting energy prices down, then if we look across the spectrum, Americans will realize lower prices and better affordability.
Here's the bet that Chinese suppliers will be desperate enough to access the US market that they will discount their products to drive sales. And let's play devil's advocate for a bit and say Bessent is partially right. Maybe some Chinese suppliers do slash the prices. It will only just escalate the trade war even further. Doesn't it occur to Bessent there are also many US companies on Chinese soil operating there, selling to Chinese consumers? Costco has at least 6 stores in China with over 140,000 people as members at the Shenzhen outlet alone. Selling in China is difficult, especially when your demographic are thrifty shoppers. But business is still booming. Just look at the crowd that's swarming into Costco. Now, we don't know the backlash that might come from Beijing. China isn't shy about putting companies on their blacklist. Brands like Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger has been placed on the Chinese blacklist, and this could lead to operational restrictions, including potential bans on imports and exports, and in the worst case scenario, it might even lead to store closures. And that's why fighting a trade war with China isn't that straightforward. There are so many second order effects that none of us can really predict. Now, I fully expect the bulk of Trump's tariffs to be eaten by US consumers. I don't think US companies will want to risk their position and abandon their market share in China, because once they lose it, it'll probably be lost forever. According to Deutsche...
I mean, again, this is a good opportunity for the US to explore robotics and push for a significant innovation in robotics to create cheap labor, here on American soil. But I don't know, the manpower required, there's going to need to be so many changes. You're going to have to incorporate universal basic income just to make it politically viable, and also to reduce the costs, because otherwise, I mean, the people that you're going to need to hire are going to be... Anyway.
Deutsche Bank, Chinese consumer sentiment is starting to recover. 54% of respondents say they feel financially better than a year ago. The amount of people anticipating an income increase has also risen to 60% as well. China's domestic consumption might be turning a corner, and if you're a company, local or international, you don't want to miss out on this. The Chinese economy is a very interesting case. There are parts like real estate that's still collapsing and industry output that's rising. But for foreign companies, all you really care about is the strength of retail sales, especially during this tariff war. Now we can see something interesting. Retail sales growth is starting to recover. Now we have to take away October's spike because that was thanks to Singles Day, the mega sales then, and China's Golden Week. So that bright spot doesn't really count. But even without that, since November last year, retail sales are heading up, whereas in 2024, it was mostly struggling in Q1 and Q2. Beijing is going to unleash the stimulus tsunami and reduce a ton of red tape, and that is going to boost domestic consumption like no other. So the Chinese market is going to be a big growth engine for American companies. Conversely, Trump wants to slash down deficit spending, and that's bad for domestic spending in the US. And we can see this bearish outlook play out in the global equity markets. The stock market is a very strong indicator. Investors, they are placing their bets, and it's not on US companies this time. According to Bank of America, US exceptionalism has peaked, and it might be a downhill ride from here. In March, fund managers are pulling out their investments from the US market. It's a big 40 percentage point plunge from the previous survey, and they are relocating it everywhere except the US. It's going into the EU, the UK, and emerging markets, which includes China. Investors are trying to front run the coming recession. They see the storm cloud building, and they probably realize that Trump's trade war is for real this time. So they're pulling their money out and throwing it into other markets that could outgrow the US. So one thing's very clear from this saga, China and the US, they will be decoupling in a very big way. It's time to throw away the old playbook of globalization and world cooperation. We are now operating in an economic minefield. But let me know what you think. Will Trump wage his tariff war to the bitter end? And how
Yeah, I think Trump is definitely going to go for the tariffs, at least just to see how it pans out. I think it's going to be very painful. So the very same people who voted for Trump, as I predicted, are going to be the ones that feel the pain of Trump the most. I don't think the tariffs on their own are doing it this way. I don't think the tariffs are necessary. I think it's unnecessary pain, because it doesn't help. What you need is a cheap alternative of manufacturing. You need an epic investment in research if the US is going to maintain its position as a leader of the free world. And tariffs are just going to make it that much harder to accomplish that. So quite possibly, it's just going to be a very painful regime. It's going to be painful to watch. I think he's going to do it, and I'm not sure if this government is going to last the 4 years. I don't know if Americans are going to be able to put up with this much pain for 4 years. But I don't know if it has. I don't know if the social consciousness or the I don't know if the American consciousness has really got to a point in the public sphere, especially with all the pain and confusion going around, for them to focus and be able to reasonably demand and strategize and obtain universal basic income, and in infrastructure spending for research, and infrastructure spending to allow for reasonable jobs in the US, and for a real push towards robotic manufacturing in the US. So like a strong push towards robotics, and that's why you see like even Jensen and people, they're pushing for robotics because now it's desperate times. And you know, China was able to they have confidence, they have optimism, and they have a track record of innovating across the board. So they're brimming with confidence, and so when barriers were put on them, it was easy for them to push together and create breakthroughs with DeepSeek, for example, and things like that. Now, whether the US can band together and face this challenge and create their own breakthroughs, that remains to be seen. But I do see a fundamental difference, which is that the Chinese, government created many decades worth of intelligent investments in infrastructure so that the people believe that the government is behind them. They don't agree with everything that the government is doing, but they believe that the government has improved their lives and has made opportunities available. And there are economic opportunities in China. It's but in the US, I don't see that nurturing take place. It seems to be becoming more and more cutthroat, more and more insular, more and more of a, of a special members club that runs everything. So I don't know if the US is going to be able to break out, to be honest. I don't know. Hope so, but I don't know.